I'd argue the number one vulnerability of ultra high net worth individuals and families is not necessarily failing from financial issues, but rather failing when it comes to relationships. In my experience, these individuals don't fear losing money. They fear losing power, control, or even damaging relationships that can't be repaired. So today, I'm going to walk you through the top 3 hurdles and or landmines that I've seen folks who have built up an 8 or 9-figure net worth face over time, in addition to the strategies you can consider to try to overcome or navigate through them. And it's important to understand, these downfalls don't necessarily occur from a market crash, a bad investment, or even a lawsuit, but rather from a relationship or multiple relationships that quietly broke down over time while everybody was too busy staring at the spreadsheets. Whether it be a spouse who stopped speaking up at family meetings because they lost their symmetry, the adult child who became frozen because they lost their autonomy, or the lifelong friend who disappeared over time due to unrealistic expectation. And by the time one notices, the fracture could be so deep that no amount of money can fix it. This is about something potentially more expensive than taxes, more long-lasting than market volatility, and even more permanent than a major financial loss. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty, where we're going to talk about this first situation and technique. And for that, we're going to use a couple named Dan and Jane. Dan and Jane were married for 23 years. They had 3 children together, and they were fully devoted to each other. Dan ended up building a company over time, which he eventually sold for an 8-figure net payday. Within 18 months, Dan and Jane found each other sleeping in separate wings of the house. What happened here, you might ask? Nothing. And that's the problem. Nothing dramatic. And that is what makes this situation so potentially dangerous. Jane used to handle the finances for the family when they had less, and she was very good at it. Over time, they would meet together at the kitchen table, and they would talk about finances, family, and life overall. But after the sale of the business, suddenly there were advisors involved. A family office, estate attorneys, tax specialists, and planning far beyond what they were used to prior. And somehow, over time, slowly but surely, although Jane was in the room, she was not in the decisions. Now, to be fair, Dan was not trying to exclude her, but he was trying to protect her from the complexity, the stress, the weight of the whole situation. And Jane, on the other hand, didn't say anything. She sat there quietly, because in the back of her mind, she didn't want to rock the boat or cause turbulence during a time which theoretically should be the happiest of their lives. But the problem here is that they were both trying to protect each other. And unfortunately, due to this, they caused a chasm which neither of them knew how to cross. Because, truth be told, at this level of wealth, financial asymmetry can become emotional asymmetry as well. While one person might quietly start to feel like the owner, the other person in the relationship might feel like a beneficiary, or need permission to make decisions. And far too often, you see that neither party in the situation knows how to talk about it. Marriage is supposed to be the one place where you're equals, where you're both acting as partners in a partnership, not where one partner forms a hierarchy. So here's what families that I've seen do so differently in trying to avoid having conflict created is that they schedule regular meetings together. These meetings are not wealth reviews, they're not portfolio updates or estate planning reviews. In fact, the meeting could be as simple as 3 questions. What feels heavy right now? What feels unfair? And what feels unsaid? No spreadsheets or market returns discussed, and no solutions to any problems. Just hearing what the other partner is going through. Because here's what I've learned over time, and may be hard for many, including myself, and that is that you can't solve emotions or feelings. However, you can be there to witness them and to learn and listen to your partner. And that in itself could potentially keep that fracture from spreading deeper. And although I'm not a psychological or relationship expert in any way, this next situation is where I've seen things get real sticky time and time again. The second relationship hurdle has to do with adult children. And this is where good intentions can end up turning into generational damage. And you may have witnessed this before, as I have time and time again, where parents with good intentions support their adult children. However, when the situation lacks structure, there's not necessarily an off-ramp. The parents tell themselves the situation's temporary, just until one gains footing in life, until they establish their career, or until they start a new business. Except, in some cases, this cycle doesn't end, because removing friction can actually end up removing the ability to benefit from the hardship. Let's take a look at Chuck, 32 years old, still on the family payroll, not working for the family, just being supported. Trust distributions every year, credit cards paid for, car lease taken care of, and rent paid on time, all by his parents. Chuck was actually a very driven young man through his teenage years and his early college career. And it wasn't that Chuck's drive disappeared, it was that the need to use it disappeared. His parents thought they were giving Chuck freedom and space. However, what they actually ended up building was more so like a cage of comfort. Chuck's parents wanted to help, but Chuck wanted independence. However, he also feared that losing this independence might come with losing comfort. And this resulted in neither Chuck nor his parents stopping this vicious cycle, which ended up building resentment by both parties over time. His parents started to feel used, taken advantage of, and almost like an ATM machine with a heartbeat. And Chuck, on the other hand, feels controlled and stuck in place, like there'll never be enough because they'll never have to be enough. And the worst part of it all is that Chuck knew it. He could feel it. He could see his friends grinding and struggling and succeeding and failing. But what he didn't know how to do was to escape this cycle without blowing up the relationship, without seeming ungrateful, without losing the sense of security that the whole situation brought to him in the first place. And although this situation might seem like there's no end in sight, I have seen families successfully navigate it. And one of the things that they do is they separate support from control. They sit down and say something like this: here's what we'll cover, here's what we won't cover, here's how much you're allowed, and if you need more, here's what you need to do. In addition, if you don't use it, here's what comes next. The bottom line here is having definitive rules without judgment. Say, for instance, they decide to cover 2 years of expenses as Chuck goes on to build his career or a business. After 2 years, that support drops to 50% of what it once was, and after year 3, it ends altogether. Having a plan which is clear, defined, and intentional might not only allow Chuck to have the feeling of security while he builds his path forward and launches into adulthood, but it also can create a sense of urgency in having a timeline in which that support ends. Chuck is not necessarily being cut off here, but he's rather learning to build the tools that he needs in the event that he should suddenly get cut off and how to continue on in life. And the emotional piece that resonates with me here is that although you might not be able to protect your adult children forever, you can potentially help them put the pieces in place intentionally to allow them to succeed later on. Having the gift of giving them the ability to know that they're capable of something, that they know they can get a foot up off the ground, that they know that they can start, do, and accomplish. Now, while navigating relationships between spouses and children could feel like we have all of our bases covered, this next situation has the potential to be a very slippery slope as well. Because this is actually what I would consider to be the loneliest part of wealth that not too many folks talk about. Friendships for the ultra wealthy can be a very delicate situation to navigate, and they don't tend to end just over a single dispute, but more so, they fade over time. Whether you stop getting invited to events altogether, or you continue to be invited, they just kind of feel different. Your friend from college stops calling or texting, or even just returning your calls and texts in a timely manner. The texts and calls in general become shorter, and dinners become more transactional. And truth be told, this could be insecurity on both sides. You don't want to make your friends uncomfortable, so you downplay things. You don't talk about the next vacation, or the new home, or the next investment. You actually find yourself editing your life in real time. They don't want to feel lesser, so they pull back. They stop sharing as much because they don't think that you can relate. And both of you start fading off. Where this friendship survived college, marriage, children, first jobs, and all the ups and downs in between, it just starts fading away. But accepting this as par for the course does not have to be the only solution. If you're paying for a trip for everybody, make it frictionless. No big announcement, no grand gesture. It just happens. If you're picking up the dinner tab, you don't show it. You just handle it quietly. And in doing so, you maintain shared context. Not shared spending habits, but more so sharing things that you both care about that have nothing to do with money. That hike you used to go on, the game you used to watch together, the joke that only the two of you know about. The point is preserving that space where you're still friends, doing what friends have always done. Because real friendship isn't necessarily about dollars and cents. It's about mutual respect and understanding that both of you are there for each other through the ups and downs, not looking at things through the lens of a wealth bracket. Now, looking at each of these hurdles, there is a similarity or a pattern that stands out to me, and that is avoidance. And avoidance can amplify things. Avoiding having hard conversations, avoiding addressing different dynamics, and avoiding disciplined structure. Why is this? Because the ultra wealthy don't want money to be the thing. They don't want to be that spouse. They don't want to be that family member. They don't want to be that friend. So, what do? They simply avoid it. But the problem is, money is already a thing. And having clarity is important because whether it be your spouse already knowing it, your family already knowing it, or your friend already knowing it, it is a thing. So I like to think about it this way. Make the rules clear up front and define them rigidly so you can let the relationships and love be messy and fun. Consider formalizing the money stuff, the inheritance, the structure and support, so the money stays money, but the relationships can remain relationships. Because at the end of the day, wealth can be a force multiplier, whether for clarity or on the other end of the spectrum, confusion. It could magnify connection, but it also can magnify distance. So I take this mindset to heart and feeling and understanding that money cannot destroy relationships. Assumptions can, lack of clarity can, and thinking that they should just know also can. So the question then becomes not whether money affects your relationships, but are you managing the effects of money on the relationships? And if you're sitting here wondering at what level of wealth all of this might change for you, check out our next video here.